I guess this is the Hitchhiker's Guide to Resilience, or at least that's what I've billed the talk, and I'm the hitchhiker in this story. So I guess I have to begin by just saying a little about why hitchhiking on this day of talking about resilience. So I'm quite a pragmatic person, and I think I realised fairly early on in life that if I wanted to go places, then I was probably going to have to find and arrange my own mode of transport. And the other thing is that when you're 16, the unknown can be quite an exciting place, and hitchhiking was quite an exciting thing to do. I had a pull factor. I loved music, and I loved travelling around all over the UK, following bands, generally unknown bands, indie, grunge, grebo, obscure, small bands. And a typical scenario, I suppose, would be to go off into the unknown, to see a band that was unknown, to meet people that were unknown, and make enough friends so that I had a couch to stay on for the night. And the thing is that I realised quite early on was I loved that sense of new connection, unexpected connection. So life changed when I was about 17, and I had to leave home, and I had to find a job. And this was the late 1980s. There weren't many jobs about in the West Midlands, the North, or indeed in East London, in Newham. But I was lucky, and I found a job. I found one of the few factories in the West Midlands that was still recruiting, and for a time I was in a really happy place. I had money in my pocket. Okay, I couldn't go off all week following bands around, but I restricted that to the weekend, and life was good. And then the best redundancy in the world happened to me. Now, of course, it didn't feel like that at the time. Redundancy never feels like that at the time, whoever you are and wherever you are in life. And I wasn't the only person it happened to. The whole factory closed down, and there were hundreds of us. It wasn't big news, even regionally. In fact, I think the only thing that would have been big news would have been a factory actually opening up in the West Midlands at the time. So I took my place alongside hundreds of others and marched down the Stourbridge Ring Road to go and sign on. And I thought that was it. But the hitchhiking provided again. I ended up on a hitch to London to see yet another unknown band. And this time I arrived in a different place. I arrived at what was then the Polytechnic of East London, and they were still recruiting. They looked for potential, not a perfect set of A-level scores. And at the end of this kind of circuitous journey, I'd landed on my feet. And it was hitchhiking I really had to thank for that. This is just some of my reflections, my word cloud when I think about hitchhiking. But when I think about resilience, I think about much of the same thing. And the thing that strikes me about hitchhiking as I get older is the reciprocity involved in hitchhiking. So I'm at a stage in my life now where I don't tend to stick my thumb out and I don't tend to need the lift. But I'm really happy still to offer the lift, to stop, make a connection, and give somebody a ride. And this actually happened a couple of weeks ago, completely unexpected. I was in a bit of a daydream as I was driving back from somewhere. And actually, I think in my own head, I was quite stressed out, and I happened to notice an old man who was standing actually just a little way from a bus stop, but he got his thumb out, and I decided to stop. I did my usual security check. I use this in all aspects of life. I checked his shoes out. I liked the look of his shoes, so I felt safe. As it turns out, he wasn't going very far. He didn't speak a lot of English, but we managed to communicate enough so that I understood, and he understood where I was going and where he was going. And we arrived at his destination, which happened to be an Indian dress shop. And he managed to communicate to me that whenever and if ever I needed a sari. I was going to get the best, the cheapest sari in town. Now, of course, the point about this is the reciprocity. I knew nothing about him. He knew nothing about me. But like all good networks, hitchhiking actually does rely on reciprocity. And one of the things in my working life, I work at the local university, the University of East London, and one of the bits of work that's closest to my heart is our Centre of Excellence for Women's Entrepreneurship. And there's a big bit of networking in that, and there's a big bit of reciprocity. So we run programs where we match emerging women entrepreneurs with established women entrepreneurs. We're inundated, as we expected, with women who wanted to make a connection, who wanted to build their knowledge. But the surprise was that we were also inundated with women who were established in their business, but who wanted to give something back, who wanted to make the connection, who wanted to share their experience. And that seemed to me to be a really, really important finding. So, I'm the hitchhiker, and I arrived in East London from Dudley in the West Midlands. What did I find when I arrived at this Polytechnic university? Well, far more than dusty books and lecture halls. And I guess, like students the world over, I found university to be just so much more than a knowledge bank. For me, it was about the networks, not just the friends, although I was, gratified to find so many. For me, it was also about the student politics. I just fell for that hook, line and sinker straight away. And I think I could probably sum up that experience, again, another life lesson, which is I really learnt to love people that I didn't often agree with. And that's okay. The other thing I would say quite seriously is I learnt as much in my years in the Students' Union, as it was then, as I ever did within the lecture halls. So it was the informal education setting as much as the formal education setting that really did make a difference. The other thing I would say is that it was all about identity. Now, I'm sure, again, it's a common thing that particular age stage in life, when young people, go off and have that independence, identity becomes incredibly important. But it did strike me that to be amongst the most diverse student community in the UK and find my sense of self and my sense of home was particularly meaningful. And UEL, like Newham as a community, is incredibly diverse. We have students from all sorts of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different nationalities, different ages. We really are not like other universities, but we like that. And there's an almost tribal UEL identity, which got its hooks into me 20 years ago and has never really gone away. And I'm really gratified to still see in the students today that same sense of pride in the identity that they have as UEL students. The other thing was, like the signs up here, for me at UEL, not just the students, the lecturers alike, it was all about constantly finding the right question and not really worrying about finding the right answer. And I think, again, that's something that has just stuck with me. And today, I think that UEL has changed a huge amount. Like Joe was telling us about the borough of Newham has changed incredibly over the last 20 years. UEL has changed in size. It's 3 times as big as it was when I was there as a student. Its space has changed. We are part of the regenerated docks. We've got one of the most modern university campuses in London, just a little further up the dock. But what hasn't changed is the mix of students or our values or the commitment, I think, that we have to our local community. So 5 years ago, I decided to come back to the university, or I had the opportunity to come back to the university as a staff member. And I admit that that's a bit weird. There's still the odd professor there that remembers me as a student. And if we pass in the corridors, we both just duck a little bit. I wasn't a model student, and they probably weren't model teachers either. But I come back with real pride, and we do an awful lot within Newham in terms of the professional workforce. I think there's some amazing statistic which for most of the teachers who work in Newham schools, the majority of them, if not the majority, the significant proportion have done their training at the university. And there's something about the university and our students where people actually want to study locally, they want to get the skills, and then they want to take those back into their community. We don't have that graduate brain drain that you see in other cities where they have big universities. And that's really, really important in terms of the ongoing resilience for this community. So our students are absolutely amazing. And I know you're going to hear from one of them a little later on, and she will tell her own story. But our students are not like traditional university students in lots of ways. So they may lack what is commonly referred to as social, cultural capital. They may lack the bank of mum and dad. They might lack those professional networks that they can tap into for the internships and the work placement opportunities. That's our job then as a university to try and make up for that gap. But actually our students have they've shown huge amounts of resilience by the very fact that they've made it to university, and they've often already performed beyond the expectations of many of their peers around them. And I think that what is quite often at the heart of that resilience is the amazing experiences and responsibilities that they've taken on from quite an early age. They might be earning responsibilities, they might be caring responsibilities. They often have grounded connections within the community through their churches, through sport, through their own voluntary endeavours. But it is those connections that really seem to make a difference in terms of their resilience and their will and their spirit to do what they do when they come to university and carry on with the rest of their lives outside, because they're very full lives. The other thing I would say, which I think says something about Newham, particularly its diversity, is that our international students, and we have a lot of international students, they come from all over the world, but often it's the diaspora community within Newham and in other boroughs within East London that provide a sense of connection, a sense of home, and helps that reforming of identity. We know that the majority of our international students choose to live outside of our halls of residence. They choose to live with connections, families, friends in the East London community. And that's very different from most universities in the UK. In fact, it is our students that tell us that our diversity in our student community is one of the biggest attractors as to why they come to us. And we know it's one of our key institutional strengths. So on a formal basis, we've done quite a lot of work as a university with the London Borough of Newham. We've got educationalists, we've got public health specialists, we've got psychologists, and they all offer theoretical and pragmatic perspectives on resilience. And these perspectives, I'm going to pick on one, which is the positive psychologist take on what the factors are that help build both individual resilience, but I think they could also apply to community resilience as well. I've picked on these because they resonate with me, and they resonate with me because of this sense I have about the importance of network and connections to resilience. I mean, some of them, it's pretty obvious, I guess, how networks are going to help support mentoring and positive relationships. But perhaps what's slightly less obvious, but is important to me, is how networks actually help you manage your stress, help reinforce your sense of positive self. So I think these are things that all, for me, seem to come together as factors around that notion of network and the connected community. So can educators help teach resilience? Well, I don't think resilience can be spoon-fed into either an individual or a community, but I do think that educational spaces and skilled teachers and facilitators can help nurture these factors, and they can help nurture that sense of connected community and the network that goes with it. So There's a couple of programs that we've run that are quite innovative projects that deal with resilience at their heart, and it's all about supporting the individual and supporting the community. Well London is quite a well-known program now in London. We've run this in association with health services, local community groups, but it's all about supporting and enhancing mental well-being, increasing access to physical activity, healthy diets. They're all very simple, basic stuff, and already some of our speakers this morning have mentioned the importance of these. And we've also worked with local schools in Newham, secondary schools, on our Sparks Resilience programme, which is about equipping pupils with the skills they need to break complex situations into simple, manageable chunks. So yes, educators, educational institutions, we've all got our part to play. Nice slide. I know Rich is going to like this because there's lots of green. I think all I wanted to really kind of conclude with is a very personal bit of reflection, really. And I guess it's that question of, so what do I know? For me, in terms of hitchhiking, it's not about the embarkation and it's not about the destination. It's about the stopping off points in between. And it's about that sense of momentum that you get when you just keep picking up the next bit of the ride. Resilience is part attitude, it's part skill, it's part environment. But what links those three is the connected community. And I think that educational institutions, the pressure they're under today is always immense, but we still have a role and we still have a responsibility in helping to build that connected community. That can be at lots of different levels, particularly in a university, but primarily it should be about building the student community and having connections into our local community. And that's what's special for me about UEL. It still believes in community. So at a personal level, I would say that over the last 20-odd years, I've unexpectedly scaled the heights of professional and personal success. But the thing is, once you get to the top of the hill, once you've struggled up there, there's always the descent. Well, for me, there's always that other bigger hill in the distance. And I think at a personal level, over the last few months, I've experienced a lot of loss in my life, and my resilience has been tested again. And one of the things that I've been reminded of is during those tough times, you need to be able to identify and care for your source of resilience. For me, that's about the people connections, about the networks of friends, of family, colleagues at work, who I work with now, but also who I've worked with in the past. I don't ever like to let a connection go. And I think one of the things is that ultimately, it doesn't really matter where I've been or where I'm heading. What does matter is the connections that I've made in between. And I think one of the things that I want to share with you, two quotes actually. Boethius puts it much better than I ever could. And I wanted to put his words up there because it's okay to mangle my words, but it's not okay to mangle his. But good times pass away, but then so do the bad. Mutability is our tragedy, but it's also our hope. And the worst of times, like the best, are always passing away. To throw in another more contemporary quote, and just to remind and invoke the spirit that gave the title to this talk, Ford Prefect from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Any man who can hitch the length and the breadth of the galaxy, rough it, slum it, struggle against terrible odds, win through, and still know where his towel is clearly a man to be reckoned with. So, whether it be attitude, skill, community, or environment, I've learned that you need to replenish and care for your source of resilience. And to care for it, you have to know what that source of resilience is. So what Or who is your towel? And how do you use your towel in your life? And just because you have that period of success, whether it be in life, in love, in work, doesn't mean that you have all the answers. I still don't know the answer to that ultimate meaning of life question, but I do know I'm not going to stop asking the questions. And whether I choose to stick my thumb out and make the connections, well, that's up to me. Thank you.